Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Good Lawyers Gone Bad podcast. My name is Stuart Teicher. So there are two things I want to tell you before we get started with this podcast today. First of all, we have a new sponsor, and the sponsor is me. I wrote a book called How to Stop Hating the Law, A Path to Hope for Miserable Lawyers. If you're a lawyer who hates the law and you have no way out, go take a look at my book. If you know or love someone who hates the law and has no way out, please go to my website, stuartteicher.com. There's a link there to buy my book, How to Stop Hating the Law, A Path to Hope for Miserable Lawyers. The second thing I want to mention to you is that there are two stories in today's podcast. And the reason there are two stories is because I finally come to realize that the optimal length for a story is about 30 minutes for these podcasts. You know, enough time for you to walk on a treadmill, get your workout in, do your thing on the elliptical, that kind of stuff. So these stories are each shorter than that. They're about 14 to 17 minutes long. So I figured I'd put two of them together and give you one nice long 30-minute episode. Now, one of them deals with true lawyer crime, but the other one, the lawyer wasn't actually convicted of a crime. I think it was more like a disorderly persons offense. But what the lawyer did was so disgusting that I call it true lawyer slime. So I still think it's worthy of this podcast. So enjoy two stories, one of true lawyer crime, one of true lawyer slime. I don't like wool hats. You know the kind I'm talking about? Those knit winter hats that fit tightly over your head, and when they're pulled down, they cover all your hair and keep your ears nice and toasty? Well, I hate them, and there's two reasons for that. First of all, I have a fat face. Now, if you know me, you're laughing right now, but you know it's true. My head is round, I have chubby cheeks, so I need the height of my hair to balance out my bowling ball-shaped head. When I cover all of my hair with a close-fitting hat, I look like a South Park character. Secondly, I run hot. Even in the winter, I'm always warm. So when I put one of those knit hats on, I feel like I've switched on a furnace inside my body. Some people really like knit hats. They look cute on my wife. She's got a great hat face. She can wear any kind of hat and look good. My son, he looks adorable in them too. Now, you might be one of those people who like these kinds of hats. I don't know. But I do know that there was a lawyer who was particularly fond of the garment. That lawyer lives in Ohio, and for a while he wore those knit hats. The only problem is, he didn't wear anything else. Any objective observer would think that Stephen P. Linen had a good gig going. Linen worked for the state legislature in Ohio, and in the legal field, that's a coveted position. Getting a job working in a state house is like making it to the NBA of the legal world. There are only 50 states, and there are a limited number of lawyer positions available in those legislative bodies. Those jobs come with prestige, they come with access to power, and that means that every lawyer wants them, but only a select few lawyers will get them. So it was surely a point of pride for Stephen Linen to be legal counsel for taxation and education to the Speaker of the Ohio House of Representatives. Snagging a prime position like that certainly made it worth uprooting himself from his home in Cleveland and moving 150 miles south to the state capital in Columbus. But jobs in the legislature aren't always easy. Esteemed government positions are generally demanding, and that pressure is compounded when the job forces a lawyer to deal with politicians on a daily basis. Those jobs require long hours. They force lawyers into difficult interactions with powerful people, and they involve a variety of other types of stressors that just take a toll on a lawyer's psyche. So it's not uncommon for the bloom to soon come off the occupational rose, and that can get a lawyer pretty fed up. That's what seems to have happened to Stephen Linen. Not too long into his tenure at the Speaker's office, Stephen Linen realized that working in the State House was getting the better of him. Lennon became disenchanted with his job and frustrated with his work at the Ohio legislature. And it wasn't only his job that was causing him angst. It seems that he was getting a little homesick as well. Stephen missed the friends and family that he left behind in northern Ohio. Sure, Columbus is only a little more than a 2-hour drive from his home in Cleveland, but the relatively short distance is irrelevant if you never have a chance to actually make that drive. After 3 years of working for the legislature, the job was taking its toll on Stephen Lennon. He should have done something to deal with the mounting pressure. He probably should have left his job. He should have packed up his office, loaded up a moving van, and headed back home to Cleveland. But the way he saw it, and these are his words, he lacked the courage to call it quits. But was it a lack of courage or a smart, practical decision? After all, he couldn't afford to quit. He had school loans to pay, bills to deal with. Well, regardless of how one framed it, the reality was that Stephen Lennon was feeling trapped. And that's what he says caused him to act out in a bizarre manner. Lois Kellogg was a manager at the local utility company, American Electric Power. One fall day, she finished up work and headed home in the evening. Lois lived alone, and she might have been looking forward to making herself something to eat, then falling asleep in front of the television. That would be nice and relaxing, wouldn't it? Unfortunately for Lois, she was not about to have a stress-free evening. Lois pulled into her driveway, passed her townhouse, and pulled into her detached garage. She shut down her car, exited the vehicle, and started making her way towards her house. It was around 6 p.m. in October in Ohio, which meant that the sun wasn't quite set yet. As Lois walked out of the garage, she was startled by a flash that came from behind her. Instinctively, she swiveled her head around and looked over her shoulder. There, in the dusk, Lois was shocked to discover a naked man wearing nothing but a knit ski cap pulled down over his head. He was holding a camera in front of his face. Lois was frozen. She was shocked. In a panic, she dropped down to the ground and curled up in a fetal position. She would later explain that she regretted having that sort of reaction, but at the time, it was the reaction her instincts provided. It's unclear what was going through Stephen Lennon's mind as he stood naked in front of Lois Kellogg. But he didn't have much time to ponder it, because at that very moment, one of Lois Kellogg's friends happened to be driving by her house. As Lois's friend jumped out of his car, Lennon took off and ran into a neighboring garage. There he retrieved his clothes and continued to run. Lois's friend gave chase while Lois called 911. Lennon's blood was surely pumping, the adrenaline rushing through his veins as if it was thrust from a fire hose. As he desperately tried to elude Lois's friend, the police joined in the chase. The cops even dispatched a helicopter to the scene. But none of them were able to find Stephen Lennon. They scoured the area, but it was no use. Stephen Lennon got away. The event was traumatic for Lois Kellogg, as you would expect. She couldn't help but feel violated. She always considered herself to be street smart, which is probably why she was so disappointed in her initial reaction. But she vowed never to allow herself to be in a vulnerable position again. So a month after the incident, she had a birthday, and she bought herself a gift. A handgun, which she now keeps accessible in her home. It doesn't appear that Lois Kellogg was Lennon's first victim, and quite frankly, for that, she should be somewhat grateful. Those first victims had an additional horror. It seems they had to watch Lennon masturbate in front of them. No, Lois Kellogg wasn't Stephen Lennon's first victim, and she would not be the last. In each case, his M.O. was the same. He would suddenly accost women who were alone and take pictures of their reactions to his appearance. The attacks were all premeditated. Linnan would scope out his victims and the locations for where he'd make his move. First, he'd choose a neighborhood where he didn't think he'd be recognized. Then, he scouted for locations in that neighborhood. It had to be a place where he felt he could encounter a woman without being seen by others. On the day of his crime, he'd stash his clothes close by so he could quickly retrieve them. Then, he'd confront the woman. He'd use his camera to conceal his face, and the flash from his photo would act as a diversion. Sometimes the person he was targeting didn't notice him, so he would touch them on the behind or on the shoulder or on the arm to make sure he had their attention. Then, he'd get dressed and take off. Sometimes Linnan was more daring than others. Once, Linnan chased a woman to her apartment and reached inside the door as she tried to get in. Another time, he struck a victim multiple times in the same day. Over the course of a year, Linnan exposed himself to some 40 women. Almost exactly a year from the date he accosted Lois Kellogg, Stephen Linnan would strike for the last time. In November of 2003, a woman was doing her laundry in a public laundry room on Harley Drive in Columbus, Ohio. What she didn't know is that she was about to be Stephen Linnan's next victim. Linnan jumped out of the shadow and confronted the woman, wearing nothing but a knit cap, sunglasses, and shoes. Linnan snapped a photo of her as he'd done in previous cases, but this time, Linnan's target fought back. The two got into a struggle, and it was violent enough to knock off Linnan's hat and his sunglasses. Linnan was able to free himself and flee the scene, leaving his things behind. The police were called, and they showed up pretty quickly, so quickly that they saw Linnan running from the scene. They chased him through the streets of Columbus, and the cops finally caught up with Linnan and arrested him. There was a mountain of evidence against Stephen Linnan. Not only did the woman from the laundry confirm that he was the attacker, but the cops also found the hat and sunglasses he left at the scene. DNA tests linked Linnan to those items. The cops then searched Linnan's home and found a computer, computer accessories, a digital camera, and, you probably guessed it, photographs of women, many of whom had reported being approached by the naked photographer. That nickname, that's what the media started calling him, and it stuck. The media had a field day reporting on the naked photographer. Needless to say, shortly after his arrest, Linnan resigned from his position with the Speaker of the Ohio House of Representatives, and then he had to face the criminal justice system. The Franklin County Grand Jury indicted Stephen Linnan on a slew of criminal charges, including felony burglary, multiple counts of sexual imposition, and dozens of counts of public indecency. On September 13, 2004, Linnan accepted a plea bargain and pleaded guilty to 53 misdemeanor offenses. He was sentenced to 18 months of work release, fined $3,000, and ordered to attend counseling. There's your True Lawyer crime. Now let's have some True Lawyer slime. Are you old enough to remember 1976? I am. I think my brother was born in 1976, my youngest brother. I'm pretty sure it was 1976. I should probably know that. Anyway, it was the time of our bicentennial. Our country was 200 years old, and we were having a massive party. There was red, white, and blue all over the place. I remember I was a young kid, but you couldn't help but notice that there was just this feeling of patriotism in the air. Everything was red, white, and blue, just all over the place. There were celebrations, there were parades, there were parties of all kinds. Every commercial had something to do with the bicentennial. All of our schools were decked out in red, white, and blue. And while the citizens of the United States were celebrating the arrival of a monumental moment in history, Jack Allen Blakesley was celebrating becoming a member of the bar in the state of Ohio. Blakesley was admitted to the bar in that year, in 1976, and he practiced criminal law in Eastern Ohio. Well, 45 years into his illustrious career, Jack Allen Blakesley would be faced with a case that would make him a household name in the world of attorney discipline in 2021. Blakesley was appointed to represent a defendant in a criminal case, and the case was horrific. On March 7, 2021, 4-year-old Emer's Pyle was killed in a most brutal manner. Someone beat him to death. Doctors say he died from major blunt force trauma, and the police believed that they knew who did it. The police arrested the live-in boyfriend of Emer's mother, a man named Alexander Wells. They charged Wells with several offenses, among them aggravated murder. A grand jury indicted Wells on June 1, 2021, and he was facing the death penalty. When Alexander Wells appeared at his arraignment a few days later, he was flanked by his appointed counsel, Jack Allen Blakesley. Wells and Blakesley weren't alone in court that day. Also present was a person that the lawyer had known for years. A victim's advocate named Michelle Wilkinson Carpenter was also there. Ms. Wilkinson Carpenter was the executive director of Haven of Hope. It's a local victim advocacy center in that Ohio area. Now, victim advocates are trained individuals whose role is to support the victims of crime. They help victims and the families of victims navigate the often confusing and intimidating world of the criminal justice system. And trust me, it can be very confusing and significantly intimidating. Victim advocates offer a tremendous amount of help to those individuals, emotional support, information about available resources, and a whole lot more. Ms. Wilkinson Carpenter would appear at several of Alexander Wells' hearings. Now, it was probably not much of an imposition for her, given that her workplace was conveniently right near the courthouse. The Haven of Hope offices are located less than a quarter mile away from the courthouse, and their offices are at 927 Wheeling Avenue in Cambridge, Ohio. Now, you gotta put yourself in the location of this building, because the 900 block of Wheeling Avenue is part of the historic district of Cambridge. And the particular building at 927 Wheeling Avenue, it fits right in with the historic landmarks in that area. In fact, the 3-story structure at number 927 looks like it probably had a grand history. The front facade of the building is entirely brick, and it contains some really handsome detail. It's got decorative keystones at the top of large window openings. You remember how they used to make those brick buildings with those beautiful large windows, and they'd put the row of brick around the window as a detail, and then there's a little, like a keystone at the top of the archway at the top of the window. That's what it looks like. But you'll notice I didn't say it was at the top of large windows. I said that it was at the top of large window openings. And I called them window openings for a reason. The reason is that the windows are long gone. All 8 areas where massive windows were once located have been bricked over. The result is that the renovation, quite frankly, has a little bit of a depressing look. I figured that it's emblematic of many a Midwestern historic downtown, an area that had a rich history but was passed over as time went on. The rectangular building sits midway between 9th and 10th Streets. I think it's really important for you to try to get in your mind's eye the way this was all laid out. It's a long rectangular block. It's between 9th and 10th Streets in this particular town. And it's a long structure that takes up almost the entire block, except in the back, there's a pretty large parking lot. So you've got this long rectangular structure, a parking lot behind it, and on one side of this lot is an alley, and on the back side of the lot is an alley. So imagine sort of an L, like a long alley going down and then turning. But it's not just around this block. Those alleys continue throughout that little community. So you've got this long rectangular building with an alley on both sides. So back to the accused murderer, Alexander Wells. In addition to his arraignment, Wells had several more hearings that year. Now, whenever he appeared at court, he was always flanked by his lawyer, Mr. Blakesley. In attendance as well, however, at every hearing was the victim's advocate, Michelle Wilkinson Carpenter. Now, on the morning of one of those hearings, something very strange happened a few miles away from the courthouse. Early on November 20th, 2021, someone driving a silver Ford Edge vehicle turned off Wheeling Avenue onto that alley alongside the Haven of Hope's building. Now, to an observer, it would look like the person driving the vehicle was sort of casing the joint, you know? I'm not sure if I'm using that phrase right. It sounds very film noir. Someone was casing the joint. But that's what it looked like, because they were very suspiciously meandering around the building in their car. They didn't look like they were driving to a point. They turned off the road, went down the alley, slowed down, and then just kind of suspiciously creeped around the area. The vehicle passed the building where the Haven of Hope offices was, and then it continued past the parking lot, and it slowly crossed that rear alley and drove past other parking lots on the neighboring block. The car turned around outside the Moose Lodge, and then it doubled back. It slowly retraced its routes down that alley. As the Ford passed the Haven of Hope parking lot a second time, the driver slowed down, threw an object out the window, and then sped off. Michelle Wilkinson Carpenter saw the whole thing. That's because it all occurred on the morning of one of Alexander Wells' hearings. So when the car sneaked down that alley at 8:15 a.m., Michelle was getting ready to go to court. She was in the perfect location to watch the entire creepy event unfold. More importantly, she knew who did the throwing. That's right. She knew exactly who threw that object out of the car. That's because she recognized the driver's face. Now, even though she immediately knew the perpetrator, she didn't exactly know what had happened. She knew the perpetrator, but didn't know what was perpetrated. What was it exactly that this person tossed into the Haven of Hope parking lot? Well, Michelle carefully approached the object thrown out of the car. And she was probably very cautious about it while doing that, given the circumstances. I mean, this didn't seem normal. She inspected the object closely, and she recognized the container. It was teal in color, and it had a familiar logo. She noticed. It was a Pringles can. But the Pringles can looked strange. It didn't have a lid, and that's when she realized something disgusting. The can wasn't full of chips. It was literally full of shit. The Pringles can was full of human feces. When Michelle got to court, she was certainly reeling from being repulsed. She met with the prosecutor and told him what she'd found that morning. She told him that she saw who threw it, and then she reported the incident to the police. When the authorities asked Michelle who threw that can, she told them who she saw. It was attorney Jack Blakesley. The investigation confirmed it all. Blakesley deposited feces in a Pringles can before leaving his home in Coal Ridge, Ohio that morning. He then drove the 15 or so miles to the Haven of Hope parking lot, threw the can out of the window, and went on to court. He appeared at the hearing for his client Alexander Wells as if nothing had happened. Oh, and just in case Michelle's eyewitness testimony wouldn't be enough, she had the security camera footage to confirm it. Blakesley was charged with disorderly conduct and littering. He pled guilty to both and ended up paying a fine and court costs. But this wasn't the end of the ordeal. Blakesley had to face the music in the attorney disciplinary system as well. The Ethics Authority charged Blakesley with violating Ohio's Rule 8.4H. It's an unusual rule that I don't think any other state has. It holds that it's professional misconduct for a lawyer to engage in conduct that adversely reflects a lawyer's fitness to practice law. It's like one of those big catch-all rules that gets all kind of bad, repulsive conduct. But just like in the criminal justice world, the lawyer faced with ethics violations has the right to defend themselves. That's what due process is all about. There were a bunch of ways that Blakesley could have gone in his defense. The path he chose was, shall we say, interesting. So he could have denied it all, right? He could have denied everything, could have claimed that he wasn't the person driving down the alley that morning. He could have said, I didn't do it. That would have been a tough argument, though, because Michelle Wilkinson Carpenter was very familiar with Blakesley. They'd worked together several times in the past, and she knew what he looked like. She saw his face. Plus, the security cameras caught it all, so the whole "wasn't me" argument wasn't going to work. Okay, so he could have admitted that he did the deed, said he was sorry, and just dealt with the consequences. That's a possibility as well, right? But a straight-up admission where one falls on one's sword, well, that can be very painful when it comes to sentencing in the attorney disciplinary world. So Blakesley had one other option. There was one other argument he could make, and conceptually, it's not such a bad argument. Okay, I actually need to rephrase that a little bit. It had the chance of not being a bad argument. Had he not taken it a drop too far. At Blakesley's ethics hearing, he admitted that he threw the can of feces that morning. He claimed, however, that it was just a prank. Now listen, given the circumstances, that's not the worst argument in the world. You don't exactly have a lot of options here in your defense, do you? I mean, he couldn't deny it was him. There's little benefit to just a bland admission. So saying that it was a prank gone too far is probably the best approach for him to take. But that's not all Blakesley said. Yes, he admitted it. Yes, he claimed it was just a prank. But Blakesley also claimed, or should I say, admitted, he also claimed that he'd carried out the prank before. Oh, not once before. Not twice before. He said he did it 10 times before. He claimed that he didn't target the Haven of Hope facility. Oh, no, it wasn't a target. He chose that spot by chance, he said. In fact, he claimed that all of the times that he engaged in this conduct, in each instance, he chose the location for his poop deposit indiscriminately. Now, I don't have the empirical evidence to support what I'm about to say, but I feel confident in assuming that this is the ethics world's first serial pooper defense. Unfortunately for Jack Blakesley, the defense was not effective. The ethics authorities thought that the argument was a load of crap. See what I did there? I was proud of myself for that one. After taking such an outlandish position, his chance of avoiding significant discipline went into the toilet. The disciplinary system didn't buy that the whole thing was just a prank, nor that it was done indiscriminately, and Blakesley was suspended from the practice of law.